there you are in 1987, an exchange student in the Soviet Union. What was that world like?
Well, that was absolutely fascinating in that period because it's the period that's just around the time of the peak of perestroika and Mikhail Gorbachev's role as president. Well, he wasn't quite president at that point. He's still Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, trying to transform the whole place. So I arrived there in September of 1987, just as Gorbachev and Reagan sign the INF Treaty. It was just within, kind of weeks of them about to sign that, which really ends that whole period that had shaped my entire teenage years of the end of the Euro missile crisis by finally having agreement on, basically the reduction and constraints on intermediate nuclear forces. And also, at this point, Gorbachev is opening the Soviet Union up. So we got all kinds of opportunities to travel in ways that we wouldn't have done before. Not just, in Moscow, which is where I was studying at the Translates Institute, but to the Caucasus, to Central Asia, went all the way to Khabarovsk in the Russian Far East, all the way around, kind of Moscow. And there was, at this point, it was also the Kreshenie Rus, which has become very important now. So the 1000th anniversary of the Christianization of Russia. Which, of course, has become a massive obsession of Vladimir Putin's, but, 988, because I was there 87 to 88. And at this point, the Russian Orthodox Church is undergoing a revival from being repressed during the Soviet period. You suddenly have the church stepping out as a non-governmental organization and engaging in discussions with people about the future of religion. So that was, something that I wasn't expecting to witness. Also, being in Moscow, this is the cultural capital of a vast empire at this point. I'd never lived in a major city before. It's the first big city I lived in. I'd never been to the opera. The first time I go to an opera, it's at the Bolshoi. I'd never seen a ballet. I was not exactly steeped in high classical culture. When you're kind of growing up in a mining region, there's very limited opportunities for this kind of thing. I'd been in a youth orchestra and a youth choir. My parents signed me up for absolutely everything, they possibly could, education-wise, but it wasn't exactly any exposure to this. So, I was kind of astounded by the sort of wealth of the cultural experience that one could have in Moscow. But the main thing was I was really struck by how the Soviet Union was on its last legs. Because this was Moscow, I got this image about what it would look like. I was quite, to be honest, terrified at first about what I would see there, the big nuclear superpower. And as soon as I got there, it was just this as if a huge weight that I'd been carrying around for years in my teenage years just disappeared because it's just ordinary people in an ordinary place, not doing great. This is the period of, what they call deficitное время, so the period of deficits. But there was no food in the shops. There was, very little in terms of commodities because the supply and demand parts of the economic equation were out of whack because this was total central planning. You'd go into, a shop that was supposed to sell boots and there'd be just one pair of boots, all in the same size and the same color. I actually looked out because once I was in this Hungarian boot shop that was right next to where my hall of residence was, and I was looking for a new pair of boots, and every single pair of boots in the shop were my size. And they were all women's boots. They were not men's boots at all, because there was been an oversupply of boots and that size production. But you could really kind of see here that there was something wrong. And, in the north of England, everything was closed down. The shops were shuttered because there was no demand, because everybody lost their jobs. There was massive employment. When I went off to university in 1984, 90% youth unemployment in the UK, meaning that when kids left school, they didn't have something else to go on to unless they got to university or vocational training or an apprenticeship. And most people were still looking, kind of months out of leaving school. And so shops were closing because people didn't have any money. I had 50% male unemployment in some of the towns as the steelworks closed down and the wagon works for the railways, for example, in my area. But in Moscow, people in theory did have money, but there was nothing to buy. Also, the place was falling apart, literally. I saw massive sinkholes open up in the street, balconies fall off buildings, one accident after another. And then there was, this real kind of sense, even though the vibrancy and excitement and hope of the Gorbachev period, a real sense that the Soviet Union had lost its way. And of course, it was only a year or so after I left from that exchange program, and I'd already started with my degree program in Soviet studies at Harvard, that the Soviet Union basically unraveled. And it really did unravel. It wasn't like it collapsed. It was basically that there were so many debates that Gorbachev had sparked off about how to reform the country, how to put it on a different path, that, no one was in agreement. And it was basically all these fights and deep debates and disputes among the elites at the center, as well as, basically a loss of faith in the system in the periphery and among the general population that in fact pulled it apart. And of course, in 1991, you get Boris Yeltsin as the head of the Russian Federation, then a constituent part of the Soviet Union, together with the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus, all of these being individual parts of the Soviet Union, getting together and agreeing of essentially ending it. And Gorbachev, so basically I'm there at the peak of this whole kind of period of experimentation and thinking about the future. And within a couple of years, it's all kind of gone and it's on a different track entirely.